Good afternoon and welcome to the Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt Orthopaedic Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust's annual general meeting for 2021. My name is Frank Collins and I'm chairman of the trust and also chairman of the Council of Governors. And for the second year running, we are bringing this meeting to you through the wonder that is Microsoft Teams. The coronavirus pandemic again means we unfortunately cannot have an audience here with us for this annual event. But using technology in this way actually makes it possible for more of you to attend this meeting. For all of you watching from your offices, from your kitchen, from your bedroom or wherever, you're welcome. Over the next hour or so, we should be looking back on the 2021 financial year. In many ways, a year like no other, as well as giving a flavour of some of the exciting developments we have in the pipeline for the next 12 months. So let me start with some reflections on that year. Of course, we cannot avoid COVID-19 in this roundup. COVID entered our vocabulary and our lives in early 2020 and has dominated the whole of that year and indeed is still very much with us. It remains a constant issue in our professional and personal lives right up to this day. In this annual general meeting, we should be highlighting just one aspect of how the Trust has responded to COVID. In a few moments, you will see a video with two of our senior operating department practitioners, Claire Heathfield and David Blackwell, who will talk about how their team managed during the pandemic and what life has been like working within our operating theatre department over this past year or so. In the course of the year, we supported our healthcare partners from across Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin by taking on emergency and trauma work. A complete change and complex challenge to the way we function as a hospital. A change which impacted all of our staff and departments. And at the same time, a good many of our staff volunteered to be based at Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital NHS Trust to be front and centre in the local response to the pandemic. Hundreds of our staff adopted different working practices during the year, be it variable or staggered attendance at the hospital, embracing the particular stresses and strains of working from home, or taking on extra duties to go beyond their normal role. Whilst the focus is often on the frontline staff, and rightly so, I want to point out that the pandemic has impacted every department and every member of our staff. I remember talking with our information team about the pressure they felt under to submit by midnight on every single day timely and accurate data on our COVID affected patients so that regionally and nationally we could understand the spread of the virus in almost real time. Of course, at the turn of the year in early 21, we opened our fabulous vaccination centre, delivering 20,000 COVID jabs within 6 weeks of opening its doors. Just a brilliant example of team working across the system. Despite COVID, it is also important that we remember that there was life before COVID-19, and as a consequence, there's also so much that was positive and that we were able to achieve in 2021 despite the impact of the pandemic. We once again caught the national attention for the quality of our care, coming top in the country for overall patient experience in the adult inpatient survey and getting exceptional feedback in the NHS staff survey. We invested in yet more cutting edge equipment, including installing a fantastic new £1 million MRI scanner. And the launch of the NHS Rainbow Badge signalled our strong commitment to being an inclusive organisation, both for our patients and our staff. In a short while, you'll hear from our interim chief executive, Stacey Lee Keegan. Stacey will expand on these and some of our other landmark achievements in more detail. You'll also hear from Sarah Ellis-Anderson, our interim chief nurse, who will present our quality accounts. Our chief finance officer, Craig Macbeth, will give details of our financial performance throughout the year. And I'm also pleased to say that we shall be joined by Mo Ramzan from our lead external auditors, Deloitte, who will present on the work that they have done to audit our annual report and accounts. Now it gives me great pleasure to say a few thanks. There is so much to be proud of and much to celebrate, even during these difficult times. It is important that I thank some of the people who have made all of this possible. I want to thank our executive team who provided the calm and supportive leadership needed during such a challenging period. During 2020, our substantive chief executive, Mark Brandreth, was seconded to NHS England to help at a very high level in the response to the pandemic on a national platform. And I want to use these opening remarks to thank all of the senior team who stepped up to the plate, especially our interim CEO, Stacey, for leading us through the incredibly scary and challenging early months of the pandemic, when, in truth, none of us were quite sure what we were dealing with. Stacey is once again in the CEO hot seat, following the departure of Mark to a senior role within our local integrated care system. I thank Mark for his contribution to our trust during his 5 years as our CEO, and I know that in Stacey, we're in safe hands. Indeed, we have a remarkably strong leadership team which sees clinicians and non-clinicians working in tandem in a series of patient-focused teams which continue to grow and develop. I want to also thank my fellow board members, particularly our non-executive directors, whose insight and experience has provided invaluable support to our executive team. Even whilst working remotely, they have continued to fulfill the crucial role of critical friend, willing to challenge the norm and pose the difficult questions to ensure we make the best decisions for our patients. Thanks go to our governors, who fulfill an important role on an entirely voluntary basis. They deserve a lot of credit, and I look forward to elaborating on that further when I present the Governor's report. I am proud to serve as chairman of the Council of Governors. Our volunteers and friends have continued to serve and support us in often the most humbling of ways. Finally, from me, thank you to all of our remarkable staff, many of whom I know are watching this meeting. For you, I reserve the biggest thanks. You are what makes Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt so special. Before I hand over, some technical bits. Now, this is the second time that we have delivered our annual general meeting live via Microsoft Teams. I'm extremely grateful to Chris Hudson, our Assistant Director of Communications, who is driving the meeting from behind the scenes. You may hear our presenters asking Chris to move on the slides as we get into the body of the meeting. You may also hear Chris's voice if any of us forget to unmute ourselves at any point during the presentations. That is a definite hazard of any Teams meeting, as many of you will no doubt have experienced. And finally, a few words about questions. Before we move on to our speakers, I also want to highlight that Teams also gives us, all of us, the chance to ask questions. That's allowing you the chance to ask us questions. On the right-hand side of your screens, you should be able to see the Q&A box. All you need to do is type your question in that box. Submit it with your name, or indeed anonymously if you prefer. Feel free to submit your questions at any point during the meeting. We will then pick these up as we get towards the end of the session, and we will do our best to provide answers to as many of them as possible. So hopefully that's all clear. And once again, welcome to our annual general meeting, and thank you for being with us. We're now going to start the meeting proper with a video presented by our Senior Operating Department practitioners, Claire Heathfield and David Blackwell, I referred to in my earlier comments. Claire and David are going to tell us a little bit more about how our theatre team worked together, and indeed with other departments across our health and care system, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. They're also going to give us an insight into the challenges faced at that time and how those challenges were overcome. Let's hear from them.
COVID-19, a pandemic in theatres, rising to the challenge. Narrated by myself, David Blackwell, ODP, and Claire Heathfield, ODP. Preparing for the unknown, which in this case happened to be a global pandemic. Something that we have no experience of. Something that we have no training for. Following an emergency training day at the Royal Shrewsbury Hospital, the enormity of the situation became apparent. So where did we start? This board is an example of many process mapping boards, or what I refer to as a battle board, as it often felt like we were preparing for war with an invisible enemy. We experienced a barrage of mixed emotions. At the beginning, it was mainly uncertainty, which led to anxiety and fear of the unknown. In order to overcome this, we had to roll our sleeves up and get to work. To do this, we had to work together, plan our processes, and ensure our staff were well looked after and kept informed along the way with the forever changing guidelines.
After the planning phase came the requirement for action. This involved proactive support across the region as part of the mutual aid agreement involving the trusts in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. The redistribution of our theatre staff internally and externally, both to our wards and over to ITU and the respiratory wards at Shrewsbury and Telford. The implementation of a trauma service here at RJAH. We took Shrewsbury and Telford's trauma service in order to allow them to focus their efforts on COVID. As you can see from the picture on the left, we transferred 12 of our anaesthetic machines and some of our consultant anaesthetists over to SAF. This was to meet the ventilator requirement or the anticipated ventilator requirement, and also to allow some of their surgical services to continue. In order for a successful trauma service, we had to exchange instruments and implants from RSH.
Part of the implementation of the trauma service, we had to establish green, amber and red patient pathways. Due to the shared airflow of the barn-style operating theatres, they were unsuitable for use. Instead, they become clean areas used to store surgical instruments and implants required to support the newly acquired trauma service. Therefore, we utilised theatres 7 to 10, which were part of the new build opened in 2016. Due to the complex airflows, we worked with infection control and the estates team in order to identify safe working zones in order to keep our patients and staff safe.
Another important factor during the pandemic was the well-being of our staff. This picture here highlights what our staff had to wear every day to work, so it was important to find ways to look after their well-being. We developed a staff health and wellbeing board. This was centrally located within our department and signposted our staff towards appropriate resources for them to care for their physical and mental wellbeing. We provided them with free refreshments. We were also able to provide accommodation for staff with clinically vulnerable family members. We promoted flexible working patterns to promote a work-life balance. And all staff were gifted a thank you day, an additional day's leave to take on or around the time of their birthday to thank them for their efforts.
So where do we go from here? What have we learned as a team, as a department, as a trust? During the pandemic, staff have been required to work differently to meet the requirements of the service. This is something that we want to continue doing within our workforce to enable us to enhance and develop the quality and care that we deliver to our patients. As managers, we not only have the responsibility to look after our patients, but we also have the responsibility to look after our staff, ensuring that their physical and mental health and well-being needs are met. We also need to continue to encourage interdepartmental working and the merging of teams for high quality patient care. And one thing we have realised and will continue to show is together we are stronger.
So despite the challenges of the last 18 months that we've all faced, the theatre department at RJAH continues to shine, and we are immensely proud of the department and the staff within it. At the Trust's annual Star Awards, we were awarded Outstanding Clinical Team. And here are just 2 examples of members of our staff that have been awarded Health Heroes, nominated by their own peers for their efforts during the COVID pandemic. Despite everything that's been thrown at us the past 18 months, RJAH Theatres continues to be an amazing place to work, filled with amazing people.
What an amazing video from 2 of our key workers in our operating theatres. So thank you, David, and thank you, Claire. I guess what that says to me in many ways is that despite the enormous stresses and strains and unprecedented pressures that David and Claire and the rest of the staff were experiencing last year, they're still looking for lessons to embed in our processes going forward. What can we learn from the previous 18 months or so that can help us do what we want to do better going forward? And I think that's a really powerful message to take away from their short video. I wonder if Stacey, interim CEO, or Sarah, our interim chief nurse, have got comments of their own in respect to that video. Stacey?
Thanks, Frank. Thank you. And I think, yeah, quite a powerful video, which I think you're absolutely right, shows how there were elements during the COVID pandemic that are still here now, but areas that we should continue to focus on and to continue to work with, and to become new business as usual. But a huge thank you to the whole of the theatre team. And I think, yeah, that was just a small shot, wasn't it, really, of 18 months where staff came together, worked differently, and more importantly, I think, as they said on their video, stronger together. So thanks, Frank.
Thank you, Stacey. And Sarah, any comments?
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, really insightful presentation from David and Claire, and clear that patient safety and caring for each other, caring for staff was paramount throughout. Should be really proud of what they've achieved as a team. And just to echo the comment that stuck with me is together we're stronger. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, great words. And of course, they left us also with the message stroke challenge that we must continue to look after our staff and the staff well-being as we focus on the restoration of our clinical services for our patients. And I know that as a board, we are very much cited on that and are doing that. What a great start to the AGM. I'm now going to move on to Stacey, who is going to present the Chief Executive's report and review of the year. And through Stacey, then we'll lead on to other reports covering different functions and parts of our activity during that 2021 year. So over to you, Stacey.
Thank you, and thanks, Frank. I'll let Chris get the slides ready, but yeah, just by introduction. So my name's Stacey Keegan, currently interim Chief Exec at the Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt My first slide really is sort of articulates a year in numbers. Just waiting for it to come up. And the numbers, certainly looking at the previous year, paint a stark picture really on how COVID has impacted our hospital. So certainly meaning that in relation to the number of elective operations that take place. As you can see there, in their hundreds, whilst usually they're in their thousands. But I think it also shows some of these numbers how hard our staff have worked. So if I look at our staff numbers, so the number of staff that are employed at Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt have increased by almost 1,000. But that's reflecting on how we've recruited and supported the vaccination centre and vaccination rollout across the whole of Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin for the system as the lead employer. Over 30,000 COVID jabs delivered by our hospital vaccination centre stroke hub here at Robert Jones. And only having started that in January. Having taken on the orthopaedic trauma service, as Frank referenced, we saw more than 3,000 patients in fracture clinic and carried out almost 1,000 trauma cases, so trauma operations. Our food, still rated #1 in the country. And again, still talking about food, served almost 100,000 meals in the last year. Next slide, please, Chris. So it would be wrong as well, I think, if I didn't, I couldn't not mention the COVID-19 pandemic. And at the very beginning of the pandemic, we paused, as did the NHS, our non-emergency elective work. And as we've heard, took on orthopaedic trauma work for Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, and also some trauma for North Wales. And when I say trauma work, I mean things like broken bones, caused through accidents, etc. But certainly that was our part to play in that regional response. Some of our elective work during that year did resume until the pandemic sort of hit and that second surge came along. And again, in the earlier presentation, you'll have heard how we, during the pause in our services, was able to release staff to support both internally at the hospital, but also in respiratory care and critical care over at Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital. Next slide, please, Chris. Also, as part of that, and we briefly touched on, the coronavirus vaccination programme took a step forward in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, really at the beginning of January, with the opening of the county's second hospital hub here at Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt. By early March, the hospital hub transitioned into a vaccination centre. That meant that more people were able to get vaccinated at our hospital. So patients were able to book appointments via the national booking system. So we played a huge part in that response and continue to do that today. Next slide, please, Chris. As Frank briefly mentioned in his introduction, and something really close to me, was when, as a trust, we launched the Rainbow Badge scheme. That was back in June 2020. And this small token, this small badge, provides staff with a way to show that this hospital and their place of work offers open, non-judgmental and inclusive care, and care for staff who identify as LGBTQ+, and acts as a visible symbol, identifying that somebody wearing this badge, they're there to listen, signpost, and offer any support. Next slide, please, Chris. During this year, a great element was our new brand new state-of-the-art MRI scanner, which we unveiled within our radiology department in October 2020. And this new scanner formed part of an investment of over £1 million to replace the eldest really of the Trust's 2 scanners. It's allowed Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt to be at the forefront of scanning capabilities to image quality, especially for those patients with hip and knee replacements. Next slide, Chris. Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt's patient Lottie O'Brien was selected as a regional winner in the NHS Parliamentary Awards. Lottie supports the Trust to provide care packages for children and young people who have undergone spinal fusion surgery, a procedure that she had herself back in October 2018, following her own scoliosis diagnosis. She was recognised in the NHS Rising Star category, which aims to celebrate those who are under 30 years of age and who give up their time to lend their experiences and deliver better services for themselves and others in their area. Huge thank you to Lottie for the work that she does. Next slide, please, Chris. Professor Sally Roberts, pictured there, is the head of Spinal Studies and Cartilage Repair Research Group, as well a Keele University research scientist, was awarded the Presidential Medal by the British Orthopaedic Research Society. She was awarded the medal for her contributions to the research of intervertebral disc and core-based therapies to treat disc degeneration and repair cartilage, and in turn improving the lives of patients who are suffering from MSK disease. Thanks, Chris. Next slide. So if I move on to performance, and if I take our first area, caring for patients. Next slide, please, Chris. And again, thank you. So the National Adult Inpatient Survey, a set of results to be truly proud of, again, with patient experience rated the best in the country, us being placed in the top band of trusts, delivering results that are considered much better than expected. Number 1 in England, again, for the quality of our food, something that we're very proud of at Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt, and also rated number 1 for the cleanliness of our wards. So a great set of results, again, that we were truly proud of. Next slide. From a caring for patient perspective as well, and we've touched on the COVID vaccination programme, but it was a truly special moment when one of our spinal cord injury patients, Pip Wright, pictured there on the screen, was the recipient of the milestone vaccine, 20,000th, after just 6 weeks after our first batch of vaccines arrived at the Trust. Next slide, please, Chris. So the following slide and graph, this shows our 18 weeks referral to treatment target, so one of our performance targets. The graph certainly shows the step change to patients waiting 18 weeks and longer for outpatient appointments and elective when elective surgery was paused. As you can see from the graph, as services were resumed on a clinical prioritisation basis, the percentages started to increase. This year we are seeing small increases month on month. The introduction of telephone and virtual appointments has helped patients to be seen and clinically assessed. Patients are monitored through our referral to treatment time processes to try to reduce waiting times where possible. However, due to the pandemic, there is a considerable backlog. Next slide, please, Chris. Another one of our performance targets of patients waiting 52 weeks or longer. So the first graph on the left-hand side shows for our English patients. And you can see from the graph that went from 0 and increased rapidly during the pandemic. National guidelines were provided to review the clinical prioritisation of patients waiting for elective surgery, and only those really as identified as urgent seen face-to-face or virtually within our outpatient setting. More recently, these patients are man-marked to enable them to get treatment as soon as possible within their clinical prioritisation. The graph next to it shows our combined list with both our English and Welsh, and all patients are treated within the national guidelines as I've outlined. Next slide, please, Chris. So PROMs are patient-related outcome measures. And the next two slides look at where we sit for patients who have hip and knee surgery at Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt. If you're not able to see, there's a small red dot. This shows that patients report significant improvement in their function and quality of life following hip and knee surgery at the Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt. Next slide, Chris. Again, that shows similar, and again, the red dot, that's for patients having hip and revision hip surgery. Next slide, please. From a patient safety perspective, our COVID infection prevention measures were praised by the Care Quality Commission when they reviewed the different measures that we've put in place to manage and protect both staff and patients during the COVID pandemic. Next slide. So if I move on to caring for staff. Next slide, Chris. Thank you. So this slide really shows from the National NHS Staff Survey some of our highlights. And the key areas really that I wanted to pull out, 79% of our staff would recommend Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt as a place to work. This showed an improvement on our 2019 score. And you can see there within the graph, better than our other acute specialist trusts. 96% of our staff said that if a friend or relative needed treatment, they would be happy with the standard of care that we provide here. And 87% of our staff say that they believe the care of patients is our hospital's top priority. Again, an improved score from the previous year. Next slide, please. Virtual visits during COVID and the challenges that this has brought, being visible and accessible to our staff has remained the board's priority. And we introduced the concept of virtual visits that consisted of the executive team, chairman, non-executives and governors being able to meet with clinical and non-clinical teams across the hospital to hear from them their challenges, what they've been proud of, and to help and assist in unlocking any problems that them teams had. Next slide, please, Chris. Caring for finances will follow later with Craig, our Chief Finance Officer's report. So looking ahead this year, again, COVID, and our focus has now turned, as well as still managing the pandemic, but has now turned to the restoration of services and being able to treat our patients as quickly as possible. Led by our clinical team, staff are working hard to ensure that as many patients as possible are treated, and we offer priority care to those in greatest clinical need. It will be a long pathway of recovery, which will continue to put pressure on our staff and hospital. Next slide, please, Chris. A really positive area is building work to develop the new Headley Court Veterans Orthopaedic Centre. It's great to be able to say that this is now well underway. Back in June, we held an official groundbreaking ceremony for the facility, which will be dedicated to treating service personnel and veterans in a bespoke military environment, and work is well underway. The £6 million two-storey building will include various areas for patients such as examination and clinical rooms, a treatment and procedure room, an assessment room, splinting and therapy room, as well as clinical space for virtual appointments. In the main entrance of the building, there will be a cafe and dedicated veterans hub where Shropshire Council and various military charities will provide support. The upstairs of the centre will feature dedicated research offices, clinical teaching and training space for staff, multidisciplinary team rooms, and of course, office space for our admin staff. Next slide, please, Chris. So our strategic aims, we have to keep improving and keep growing. And we must think about how we continue to flourish in what is now a difficult time for the NHS. We broke it into our key areas: operational excellence, getting a grip on the operational things that will make a significant difference to our patients. Our local MSK services, establishing the Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt as a central part of the local health system, rather than a fringe specialist provider. Being a national voice in our area of expertise, working in partnership with our specialist neighbours. And importantly, underpinning the above is culture and leadership. There must be a patient-focused, clinically led organisation that is an extraordinary place to work. Thank you. If I can now hand over, please, to Sarah Ellis-Anderson, our Interim Chief Nurse and Patient Safety Officer, to report on our quality account.
Thank you, Stacey. Despite being a really challenging year with the impact of COVID-19, patient safety and quality has remained at the forefront of Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt. The first slide, please, Chris. So last year, a total of 6 quality priorities listed on the slide were chosen as areas for improvement. 2 of the 6 priorities, the improved detection and escalation of the deteriorating patient and the enhanced patient safety in theatres and diagnostics, were not fully achieved due to the periods of paused theatre activity, and therefore they remain a key focus for us in this current year. This presentation will outline the achievements of the 4 other quality priorities for last year and give a brief overview of the key areas of focus for the year ahead. Next slide, please. So the aim to reduce medication errors resulting in patient harm was fully achieved, with a marked reduction in the number of incidences being reported with associated harm. This was done through education on the defined harm levels, which in turn resulted in a new policy being implemented to support our managers. Monthly medication reports supplemented with regular deep dives enabled early identification of emerging themes and facilitated trust-wide learning. Next slide, please. The aim to reduce the number of inpatient falls was not fully achieved. This may have been as a result of the trauma service transferring to Robert Jones at the start of the pandemic, with those patients, that cohort of patients being a higher risk of falls. Following the return of the trauma service and resumption of our elective activity, we have completed some analysis on the patient falls incidence and find that some patients have had multiple falls. So this is a particular focus for the Trust Falls lead going forwards this year. Next slide, please. The aim to reduce hospital-acquired pressure ulcers was partially achieved, although noting an increase in 2020-21. We believe this is as a result of increased education and accurate categorisation of pressure ulcers. A tissue viability nurse was appointed and she will continue to roll out the training and education across the organisation. Next slide, please. This clinically led quality priority is aimed to reduce length of stay for our patients having primary hip and knee surgery, with the aim of 15 to 20% of our patients being discharged on day 0 and a further 60% being discharged on day 1. During 2020-21, there's been significant clinical engagement and specific parts of the patient pathway were focused on and improved, and full implementation will continue this year. Next slide, please. So to choose our priorities for this year, we've considered various feedback mechanisms, including our quality and safety metrics, our patient experience data, and importantly, our staff feedback. As I've previously mentioned, 2 of the quality priorities within the patient safety domain were carried forward from last year, and 4 new quality priorities have been identified, 2 in the clinical effectiveness domain and 2 in the patient experience domain. Next slide, please. Enhanced patient safety and reducing the amount of patient safety incidents in theatres and diagnostics continues to be a key priority. This aim hopes to be achieved by the introduction of safety champion roles, bespoke human factors training, and improvements in the audit compliance of the WHO 5 Steps to Safer Surgery. Next slide, please. Carried forward from the previous year, further work is being done for this quality priority, focusing on the early detection of deteriorating patients. The critical care outreach service is being expanded to support this training and education at ward and department level. Next slide, thank you. Within the clinical effectiveness domain, a new priority has been established with the aim of providing safe, effective and healthy work environments for our staff, acknowledging that our staff have been working in unprecedented and challenging circumstances. This has also been identified as a theme for improvement on last year's staff survey results, and several actions are in place to improve our staff health and wellbeing this year. The Trust's research strategy aims to increase the amount of non-medical research done within the organisation. The first step to this is raising the profile and awareness of non-medical staff groups, which this quality priority hopes to achieve through the development of research champions across the Trust. Within the patient experience domain, a quality priority relating to delayed discharges has been established. It's essential to involve the patient as early as possible during complex discharge planning, and this quality priority aims to do so with a focus on improved patient-family communication. Next slide, please. As Stacey has explained, COVID has resulted in increased waiting times for our patients for their appointments. So this quality priority aims to improve communication to ensure patients remain appropriately informed whilst they're waiting for their appointments and treatment. Thank you. I'd like to hand over to Craig, our Chief Finance Officer.
Sarah, thanks very much. So if I could have the first slide, please, Chris. So the first thing I wanted to bring to people's attention is that the COVID situation also impacted on our financial performance in year, and certainly the business mechanisms that we have in place. So traditionally, we would always be paid a level of income dependent on how many patients that we treated. So the more patients we saw, the more income we'd get, and vice versa. However, such a model clearly would not have been helpful in sustaining the delivery of services during the unprecedented times that we've been through in the year. So nationally, an emergency financial framework was introduced, which sought to ensure that every single hospital up and down the country was reimbursed for its running costs, recognising that they would have increased from historical levels because of the arrangements which needed to be put in place for dealing with the pandemic. Alongside that, there was an expectation that every hospital delivered a break-even position, so making sure that the money was spent in line with the income received. So that was a key change. So if I can have the next slide, Chris, I'll just show you how we performed against that new requirement, so to speak. So you can see here the key numbers from our accounts for the year. So our turnover, a very, very modest increase on the previous year as a result of the new financial framework. We did actually deliver a very healthy operating surplus of £4.5 million, which was an increase on the year before. And you remember that's against a break-even requirement. Basically speaking, we got some very last-minute national funds allocated to us here at Robert Jones. We were eligible for the way they were carved out at the end of the financial year. Otherwise, we would have been on course for the break-even position, but we benefited from that national redistribution of surplus funds. And that £4.5 million will be banked onto our balance sheet, and we'll be able to reinvest that in services here in the future. The efficiency number, so it's a regular feature of my annual review, is how well we've done on efficiencies. It's typically around 2 or 3% a year that we would be striving to deliver in order to manage the various financial pressures that we have. Obviously, 2021 year was a very unusual year, so the acceleration of efficiencies was put on hold pretty much. There was a very modest level of efficiencies delivered, which were largely the full-year impact of measures which had been put in place in earlier years. Capital loans outstanding, that's another key one to keep an eye on. So some of you may remember we took a £10 million loan to fund our fabulous new theatre developments. We're now halfway through repaying that. We've been mid-term in terms of that loan. We did take out a new loan in year as well. It was an interest-free loan of just over £1 million to support some green energy initiatives, which have a really good payback and obviously reduce carbon footprints as well. So it was something we were very keen to take advantage of that offer. And then the final key number I've got on the slide here is our cash balances, which strengthened further in year. And obviously that will be a really good launch pad for us to manage future investments or any difficulties we may have with costs going forward. So a very strong cash position to end the year with. If I can move on to the final slide of mine, please, Chris. Okay, so this has been touched on already in actual fact, but generally speaking, I always like to just finish off by showing how our financial performance benefits the hospital through the capital programme and how we've reinvested our previous surpluses back into services here. So we ran a programme, we delivered a £5.5 million programme in year. As Stacey's mentioned and Frank's mentioned as well, a big thing of that programme was the replacement MRI scanner. But beyond that, we also replaced a good deal of equipment, particularly around diagnostics. Some of our X-ray rooms went digital, a new fluoroscopy suite as well, and other medical equipment as well. So we had a real acceleration of ensuring our equipment is up to date. Similarly, with our estate, continued the progress on critical infrastructure, making sure that the estate is where we want it to be in terms of having the right environment to treat our patients. And obviously that's become a lot more challenging given the infection control requirements in the last 12 months as well. So much of our programme was redirected on ensuring we've got the right environments to manage patient flows in a pandemic. I talked about the energy improvement scheme on green energy projects. Again, that was completed in year, £1.1 million spent. So we were really pleased about that. And then we continued as well to recognise the importance of digital in becoming more efficient and supporting some of our transformation requirements. So an ongoing digital investment programme was fulfilled. So that's the end of my summary of the year. I'm now going to hand over to Mo Ramzan, who is our external auditor from Deloitte, and Mo will give an auditor's assessment of our financial standing and financial accounts for the year.
Thank you, Craig, and good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully I'm coming across. My name is Mo Ramzan. I'm from Deloitte, your external auditors, and it's my pleasure to present to you today on our audit of the 2021 financial statements for the Trust. Firstly, similar to others, I just wanted to recognise that once again this year's accounts preparation and audit process across the NHS continued to be impacted by COVID-19, with implications on how we were able to work with the Trust, working remotely with the finance team, and also in terms of the timetable for our work. So whereas normally the audited accounts would be submitted by the end of May, this year that was extended to the 15th of June, and over half of trusts in the end required a further extension to the 30th of June. So really pleased to say, and with thanks to the CFO Craig and the finance team for continuing to be proactive in their approach in working with us, we were able to finalise our work for your accounts to be submitted in advance of the 15th of June deadline. Now, if I may take you to page 3 or slide 3 of this pack, thank you. This sets out an overview of our audit approach, the scope of our work, which includes providing an opinion on your accounts and consistency of your annual report and annual governance statement, and this year also an extended review of the arrangements for ensuring value for money at the Trust. This also brings me on to another area of ongoing COVID impact, in that for the current year, once again, we were not required to undertake audit work which we would normally undertake on the Trust's quality account, and we'll awaiting guidance in terms of the requirements around that for the forthcoming year. The boxes on this slide set out at a very high level the work we undertake, the opinions we are required to provide this year are set out, and I'm delighted to say that we issued unmodified opinions from our work across each of the areas that we're required to report on, and that is a real positive achievement, and certainly not the case across all of our clients. So really pleased to be able to report that to you. If we move on a couple of slides onto slide 5. Thank you. So this slide provides a summary of financial performance, which Craig has touched on already, and it shows that the Trust achieved its plans and has a rating of 1, which is the lowest risk. And so this is a strong position and compares favourably with other organisations across our client base. We noted in our work around financial sustainability that whilst the Trust has had a strong financial position in the current year and in recent years, going forward there is some uncertainty both nationally on planning guidance at present, and also locally the operational and financial challenges across the integrated care system will bring increased uncertainty and risks for the Trust to manage. Let's move on to the next page, please. So this slide headed audit findings. I firstly wanted to again thank the finance team. They worked well with us during the year and ensured that a high standard of working papers were provided to support the audit. As part of our work, we provided comments and feedback on the Trust accounts, the annual report and the annual governance statement, and these were taken on board and reflected on in the final versions that were submitted. As I commented earlier, we didn't identify any significant weaknesses in the arrangements of value for money or deficiencies in the financial reporting systems, with only a couple of minor recommendations being made and responded to by the Trust. That concludes what I wanted to say on the external audit report, and now happy to hand back to the Chair.
Thank you, Mo. And on behalf of the board, and in particular Craig and his finance team, and David Gilbert as chair of our audit committee, I extend our thanks to you and your team for the very professional and supportive way in which Deloitte have once again engaged with the organisation in terms of our annual audit. A difficult year, as we all know, but we're very grateful to you for the very professional way in which you and your colleagues handled those circumstances, so thank you. It's now my absolute pleasure to present the annual Council of Governors report as chair of the council, and in order to do this, I'm going to talk to a number of slides, starting off with the duties of the Council of Governors. And as attendees at this meeting will know, but I think it's important to remind ourselves, the governors, firstly, they are volunteers. They receive no remuneration for their efforts and their contribution to our organisation. That's the same with governors up and down the country. And they have three main duties. Firstly, to hold the non-executive directors individually and collectively to account for the performance of the board. And I'll talk a little bit more about each of these in a moment. Secondly, to represent the membership and to represent the interests of the members of the trust. And again, I'll touch on what that means in just a moment. And thirdly, to fulfil the statutory duties relating to the governors, and that largely focuses on the appointment and reappointment of non-executive directors, ensuring that the trust constitution is effectively approved and adhered to, and approval of any large or significant transactions. So in a little bit more detail, in terms of holding to account, we just have the next slide, please, Chris. The council held the non-executive directors to account for the performance of the board through a number of actions, and these were fulfilled even during the difficult and challenging times of 2020-21. The main essence of this is to receive reports from me at every council meeting, to receive regular reports on the trust performance from the chief executive, to receive updates from the chief nurse on the quality report, and you've heard Sarah earlier talking about the priorities of last year's quality report and how many of those priorities have rolled forward into the new year that we're now working through, to contribute to and listen to presentations at the board of directors from non-exec director chairs of our board committees. And we have a number of board committees: finance, planning and digital, quality and safety, audit, risk management and people committee. And these undertake much of the heavy lifting of the functions of a trust board. And we've configured those committees in such a way that they kind of overlap, so that there hopefully will be no issues which will fall below or between the cracks of those committees. And the role of the Council of Governors is to ensure and help us ensure that that remains the case. And they do a very effective job in that regard. We give them, as a council, regular updates on strategic planning issues. And one of the things we've introduced at Robert Jones is a regular meeting, regular dialogue between Harry Turner, our Senior Independent Director, and the governors, so that Harry can talk in perhaps a slightly more informal way, and certainly in a more detailed way, about some of the issues which we might be debating at our monthly board meetings. And I think that's been a very well received initiative which we've introduced to the council. Next slide, Chris. So the second formal obligation of the council members and the Council of Governors is to represent the public. Now, of course, the 2021 year has been slightly challenging in their ability to do that, but notwithstanding the pressures and restrictions of COVID-19, the governors have represented the public through participating in a number of virtual visits to departments across our trust, by having update meetings with Harry as our Senior Independent Director, and by ensuring that assurance has been effectively secured by the non-execs through observing and then commenting upon our public board meetings. In more normal circumstances, Council of Governors undertake a number of other activities. The quality priorities, which Sarah's alluded to, receiving regular reports on trust membership, participating in governors' surgeries to enable members of the public to raise issues and provide feedback as appropriate, sitting on patient panels, and something we've not been able to do this year, but attending patient safety walkabouts. And hopefully those initiatives can be reinstated in the coming weeks and months. And the third area of the duties of the Council of Governors is their statutory duties. And during the year, you can see 3 examples of how they fulfilled that. Considering the statutory declarations made by the board, and we do that on a monthly basis, we review whatever statutory declarations we need to make and whether they need to be updated. Approving, once considered, the reappointment of, in this instance, it was Professor Paul Kingston, a non-executive director, who also chairs our People Committee for Paul's second term as a non-exec director, and indeed considering and approving the extension of the tenure of me as chairman for 12 months, given the particular extenuating circumstances resulting from the COVID outbreak. Next one, please, Chris. In terms of our Foundation Trust membership, we do have a Council of Governors membership strategy. And last year we were able, despite the pressures, to recruit 70 new members, which is a great credit to the governors, but also to Shelley, our Trust Secretary, for her endeavours in that regard. And we're, I think, delighted to say we have something of the order of 6,500 members at the end of the year, an increase of about 1% on the prior year. The Governor's annual report is available on our website, and if I can have a look at the final slide, please, Chris, or the next slide, I'm sorry. Excuse me, I've got a tickle in my throat. I'm just going to mute. As board members will know, I'm suffering with a slight head cold today, and I think it's just getting the better of me as we get towards the end, but bear with me. So in the last year, the Council of Governors approved the recommendation to suspend any elections for a 12-month period because of particular circumstances, and that did mean that extensions were given to a number of governors, and the names are listed there: Jan, Russell, Martin, Colin and Kate, and we're delighted to retain their expertise and organisational memory with us, at least for that extended 12-month period. I think that concludes my update from the Council of Governors. Apologies for it being slightly rushed at the end, but I didn't want to cough and splutter too much, and I hope that didn't impact the delivery of that presentation. I'm now going to hand back to Stacey, our Interim Chief Exec, who's going to say a few words about the Dame Agnes Hunt Nursing Medal Award for this year. Stacey.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you. The Dame Agnes Hunt Nursing Medal was first introduced at the hospital back in 2017 when it was presented to Sister Glenna Hardy, one of our nurse practitioners, as part of a royal visit by RJAH Princess Alexandra to open our theatre and oncology building. Since then, the presentation of this award has become an annual part of our calendar and is awarded to a nurse within Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt who really shines and shows values of our nursing profession. Dame Agnes Hunt once said that the real qualities of a nurse are common sense, gentleness, kindness, and the power of giving hope and joy to those who are sick and suffering. And certainly these words certainly ring true for this year's recipient. It gives me great pleasure to reveal that the winner of the Dame Agnes Hunt Nursing Medal for 2021 is Anne Lloyd, Ward Manager on Clwyd Ward. Anne received her medal and certificate yesterday from our Chief Nurse, Sarah Ellis Anderson, and here is the moment that she received it.
And it's with my great pleasure to award you with the Dame Agnes Hunt Nursing Medal Award for outstanding contribution to nursing care.
Thank you ever so much. This is an absolute shock, a real shock. Thank you, Sarah, very, very much.
I can't think of anyone more deserving. And if it's all right with you, I'd just like to read a few comments from people that have nominated you for the award. Okay.
Thank you.
So Anne is a kind, compassionate, competent nurse who quietly and unassumingly offers strong leadership, support and guidance to her team and the wider nursing team at RJAH. She has a passion for teaching and nurtures junior nursing staff, bringing out the best in her team, always leading by example and particularly supporting those staff that were left here whilst other staff were redeployed during COVID.
She's diligent, calm and caring, and often taking on additional responsibilities through her natural leadership without question. She's a true credit to the nursing profession and an asset to RJAH. Thank you. Thanks ever so much, whoever or wherever those have come from. Absolutely. Don't know what to say really. I lost for words for once. Well, thank you very much, Sam. Thank you. That's amazing.
I think that's just amazing, isn't it? And you know, the Dame Agnes Hunt Nursing Medal and Award it's a really special achievement. It's only given to those very select few who have attained and delivered excellence in what they do. And the great thing about all of the winners is that they often don't know that. They are the most humble and lovely individuals that you could ever wish to meet. And Anne Lloyd is right up there in terms of that definition. And I know all of the board and all of the hospital will be absolutely delighted that she is this year's winner. So congratulations, Anne. It was a little bit like announcing the winner of Bake Off before the final programme went out, in that it was clearly the ceremony was given yesterday. But I think Anne has managed to keep it quiet until this afternoon, which again is just another absolute credit to her. So well done. Well done. Okay, that's beginning to draw us towards the end of this annual general meeting. But before we get to the end, it is now an opportunity to consider and hopefully respond to any questions which might have come through during the course of the meeting. In that regard, I'm going to ask Chris if any questions have been posted, and if so, if he could share them with us. Chris, over to you.
Indeed, Frank, we've had a few questions and a few comments as well, actually. So I'll let people and panel members read some of those comments, some of our governors in particular. A comment from Russell: Frank, thanking you for your service over the years, mindful of the fact that you're coming towards your term of office, and I'm sure everybody would endorse that comment. Financial related question from William Greenwood. I can see Craig has responded in the chat, but maybe for people who can't see that, if I can read out that question and we can maybe invite Craig to respond as well. So William says, with the upcoming changes in the system structure of the NHS, i.e. working as a more involved part of an integrated care system, is this going to have a greater impact on our freedoms, e.g. capital investments going forward?
Yeah, great question, Will. Craig, do you want, I know you've answered it in the chat, but perhaps you could just offer a sentence or two on that.
Yeah, of course. No, I put it in the chat actually because I've had a fire alarm test going off outside my window, so I wasn't sure if it would disrupt the background noise. No, good question. You know, lots of interest at the moment in what working as an ICS means to us. We're currently working under that framework in this financial year, in actual facts, and it doesn't give us any new freedoms as such. In fact, we now have a ceiling that as an ICS we cannot exceed in terms of our capital investments. But the upside is, William, it does now give us access to more national money. It's something we've not been very successful previously. We've always had to earn our own right to spend capital, but being part of the ICS has increased allegations of national funding. And you'll have seen in the news, for example, there's a big pot of money coming through this financial year in the second half of the year to support restoration. We anticipate that will continue to be allocated through our ICSs, and then that gives Robert Jones a much better opportunity of being able to access those funds.
Thank you, Craig. Any other questions, Chris?
It would help if I unmuted myself, Frank. I apologise for that. I've also got
okay.
a phone ringing at the same time, so I apologise for distraction in the background. I've had a question, not so much a question, but a comment from Judith Harris, who's one of our staff. Judith comments on the fact that our hospital has recently been rated as the best in the country for training junior doctors. That was a report that was in the Health Service Journal recently. Now, we're reporting here clearly on the 2021 financial year, but maybe a comment where Stacey and/or Sarah would want to come in. And as I say that, by the way, for the third time during this meeting, a fire alarm is going off behind us, so I apologise for even more noise.
Well, if nothing else, Chris, it proves it's live. With me with my coughing fit, Craig and you with the fire alarm, and with the phone going. And yes, yeah, I missed the name of the questioner, but you're absolutely right, or she's absolutely right. We did receive national recognition for the quality of training we give to our junior doctors, and maybe Stacey have a comment on that. What I would say is that will clearly feature in next year's annual report, an annual general meeting, but also as recently as just this morning, we had a trust board meeting in public where one of our associate specialists presented a fantastic insight into life as an associate specialist, or an SAS doctor as they're called in the trade, and he spoke passionately about the kind of support, be it both training, clinical or personal, that our sub-consultant doctors receive in this organisation, which was just lovely to hear. Stacey, I don't know if you want to supplement anything that I've just said.
Yeah, thanks Frank. And yeah, I think recently in public board we've had a couple of really good presentations from both the SAS this morning, doctor and our registrar as well. But yeah, a huge achievement, which as you rightly point out, I think we'll discuss more, isn't it, as part of next year. I've been working quite closely with our consultants recently to really restart our training, face-to-face training for our doctors, which unfortunately, obviously due to COVID, had to be paused. However, how they came together to do things differently via virtual means, etc., to ensure that training didn't stop during the pandemic. So great achievement for them, but great to be able to start face-to-face training back up very soon.
Well, I think, Frank, that covers all the questions we've had, really. Like I say, a few other comments in there that people can read, and I've sort of given the tone off, but I think that covers all the questions from the public, so I'll pass back to you to close the meeting.
Thank you, Chris. And in doing that and receiving that baton back for you, may I start this close by putting on record my appreciation and all of our appreciation to you and to the comms team for your tremendous hard work behind the scenes in making this live virtual event go so smoothly. It is incredibly challenging to do this, even with modern day technology, and you've done it exceptionally well. So thank you. May I also thank all of my colleagues who've been involved today, to Mo from Deloitte, to Craig, Stacey, Sarah, but also to David and Claire for their video, which started it all off, and of course to Anne and everybody who worked behind the scenes to support each and every one of us in the preparation and delivery of today. To those of you who've been listening and participating, thank you for your questions and your engagement, and thank you, Russell, for your kind comments about me. Very much appreciated. I do hope you found it all of you found it to be of use and of value. We know how important Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt Trust is to our patients and our patients' relatives from wherever they may come. We thank each and every one of you for your support. We certainly don't take it for granted, and we try our very best to fulfill your expectations in us. We shall continue to do what we do best, which is provide great quality orthopaedic and associated care during the new financial year. And we hope in doing that, we can fulfill your clinical and personal needs. But it is tough. You've heard from the Chief Executive, the Chief Nurse and our Chief Financial Officer about how challenging the next 12 months, 24 months is going to be. Despite those challenges, and indeed the continued presence of COVID-19, we will pledge one thing, and that is that we shall do the very best we can for all of you. So on that note, I will draw this AGM to a close. Let's hope we can meet again in person in 2022. But until then, thank you for your support this afternoon and your engagement, and goodbye.